All right, guys, welcome back. And today we are going to be discussing the Treaty of Versailles. This is big, right? Because this is the end of World War I. It's the thing that officially puts an end to this massive, massive conflict. The problem is that the Germans really agreed to an armistice, right? An armistice being this temporary ceasefire in which time they can work out a lasting peace. They had agreed to the ceasefire believing that the treaty would be based on Wilson's 14 points. Wilson's 14 points were really very good for the Germans. It didn't force them to accept blame. It didn't force them to pay reparations. It really wasn't punitive at all. It basically said this war has been a world tragedy. It's been a mistake for everybody. There's no one country that's really to blame, but we need to address this war and any potential future wars. So Wilson's 14 points, not a terrible idea. The problem is that when they get to Versailles to kind of address the treaty and what it's going to look like, Great Britain and France really insisted that Germany be punished. They wanted this thing to be far more punitive. The reason for that is that much of this war had been fought on French soil. The British and the French had really taken among the largest casualties in this war, and they felt like it was due to them. They thought that they needed to get something in return. That Germany needed to be punished for all the worldwide pain that had been caused. So rather than basing the permanent peace on Wilson's 14 points, they come up with something completely different. And in fact, Germany isn't even invited to the party. They're not allowed to give input. They're not allowed to raise objections. This treaty is going to be created, and then ultimately they're going to be forced to sign it. So what we're going to see is that Germany doesn't really have the will to start fighting. Remember, this was being worked out in the midst of an armistice, a temporary peace. But they had really been so terribly devastated, really ultimately defeated, that they didn't have the will to start fighting again. And so that's why they signed the treaty. It was really forced upon them. Now, what we will see is that the Treaty of Versailles is the thing that officially ends the Great War. And here we see a newspaper kind of touting that. But what does it contain? Really importantly, and one of the biggest parts here, is that the Treaty of Versailles contains what's called the War Guilt Clause. And the War Guilt Clause says that Germany has to acknowledge and accept full blame, full responsibility for the entire war. They're basically the last of their alliance that's standing. We know that the Austro-Hungarian Empire has collapsed. The Ottoman Empire has collapsed. Italy pulled out very early. And so now we're going to see that Germany's the last one standing for their alliance, and they're going to accept the blame. However, in accepting the blame, they also accept a part of the treaty that says they have to now pay reparations. That means they're paying war damages. And the damages that they had to pay other countries involved, like Belgium and France and Great Britain and others, were really so high that it was devastating to the German economy. I mean, it absolutely put them into a depression. 10 years before the worldwide Great Depression, Germany is going to suffer under the terrible weight of these reparations. Their money was worthless. And the country was just absolutely destroyed by this. And that was really kind of the point, right? Is they wanted to, these other countries, the Allied countries, wanted to make sure that Germany never had the economic wherewithal, the military wherewithal to rise up again and threaten anybody. Well, we know that backfired, right? So what we're going to see is that other provisions are that Germany is forced to limit their military to just 100,000 men. Now, that sounds like a lot of people, but in light of what their neighbors all had, it was really very minuscule. In fact, 100,000 men wouldn't really allow them to even give a serious defense of their own nation should it be needed. And so it's in many ways a slap in the face. You're going to be relegated to second-class status in terms of your military with only 100,000 men. France had over 1 million. Great Britain had over 1 million. Belgium's military was larger than this. So it really is a pretty bad thing for Germany to have to accept this. Now, that's one provision. What we will also see is that German Navy is also limited to only 6 battleships. Again, while France and Great Britain and Belgium and others are going to have a far larger Navy, Germany's allowed only 6. And by the way, those ships were limited in terms of the type of ships they could be. The rest of their ships, above the 6 they were allowed to keep, they were forced to turn over to the Allied countries. Well, rather than doing that, they took them out to sea and scuttled them. It means they sank them rather than give them to France or Great Britain. So now Germany is limited to just these 6 battleships. In addition to that, they're not allowed to have any of the newest technology. They're not allowed to have an Air Force, any airplanes. They're not allowed to have any submarines. They so terrorized the skies and the seas that these allied countries wanted to make sure that that was never possible again. So they limited not only the number of troops and the number of ships, but also said you're not allowed to have any submarines. You're not allowed to have any planes. Again, it's making it really hard on the Germans here. We're also going to see that Germany isn't allowed to have any troops in what's called the Rhineland. Now, you can see on the map there that the Rhineland is the part of Germany that borders France and Belgium, among others, right? And they had done such a number in terms of devastation on France that France was really just terrified, right? They were worried about a Germany that would rise again and that was so close in proximity that they could come across that border. So they basically said Germany is not allowed to have any troops there. I always find this really interesting because that's sovereign German territory, right? They're sovereign over their land. That would be as if Mexico said, you know what, United States, you make us nervous. You're too powerful, so we're going to demand that you're not allowed to put any troops in the state of Texas because that's too close to our border and it makes us nervous. I wonder how the United States would respond to that. I think we would be more likely to put all of our troops in Texas just to spite them. We're not going to be told what we can do within our borders on our own soil by any foreign nation. And yet here is Germany being forced to accept these demands that really limit their sovereignty. So the Rhineland, while it's technically German soil, they're very limited in what they can place there in terms of their military. It's being overseen by kind of the international community. All right, what's next? We see that Germany is really forbidden from uniting with Austria. Remember, their closest ally in World War I had been the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so there's this pan-German movement where you see that the German-speaking people of Austria and the Germans really want to unite. And that really made a lot of the allies nervous. So they said, no more. Germany, you're big enough. If you join with the Austrians, it makes you too big, too powerful, too influential. So that is a non-starter. You're not allowed to do that. There were a lot of different provisions to the Treaty of Versailles. The ones that I'm bringing up are going to play a role later on when we talk about the beginning of World War II and how that all develops. So there are a lot of other parts of this, but the ones that we've brought up play a significant role. Now, what we'll see is that the treaty is really, again, designed to punish Germany and make sure that they can never again rise to threaten the other people of Europe. Problem is, this was probably too strong. It was too much. And so it backfires on them. And we're going to see that the Treaty of Versailles is going to actually become so hated and so despised that it's used in German propaganda in ways that will allow them to rise. So anyway, guys, I hope that you learned something about the Treaty of Versailles and about the end of the war. The German people are going to be absolutely crushed by this thing, but we know that it won't last forever because they're going to begin to break it. So anyway, tune in for the beginning of World War II when we talk about exactly how they break it and what that looks like. So thanks for watching. Please go ahead and subscribe. If there's anything that you think I missed or you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. I try to get back to everybody. Thanks, guys.